Thanks for having us today. Pleasure to be here, and we're going to spend a few minutes today is to do a little bit more background material about how we're going to arrive and what that process looks like at the city. Governance on the financial planning process, or the budgeting process, exists in both the provincial realm and at the municipal level with council. So from a provincial standpoint, in the community charter, the province dictates that budgeting must be a 5-year process, for example, outlines the source of use of funds, and a capital program and how it's funded in a municipality. The province also gets to govern some of the content in terms of whether the municipality can run a deficit, the ability to take on debt, and those kind of limits. At the local level, your council helps set the level of service and determines the capital priorities for the city. And as part of making those decisions, they undertake a series of public engagement initiatives. So we've got some upcoming events later on in January at the Civic Center in terms of an open house and the ability to come interact with council on the budget. There are 2 plans within an overall financial plan. You have an operating plan and a capital plan. The operating plan covers the daily services that you experience. So the operations of our water and sewer system, the ability to turn on street lights, staff wages for mowing city fields during the summer, those kind of things that are really contained within benefiting the residents during a particular year. On the capital side, it covers investments that would benefit residents in the community for a period greater than 1 year. So think about water wells that supply drinking water over many decades, or the ability to operate city equipment such as a street sweeper. That would be part of our capital plan. I think it's really important that residents understand that municipalities function a little bit differently than the other more senior levels of government. Both the province and the federal government can operate a deficit in which their expenditures can exceed revenues in any given year. Municipalities cannot. We are required to live within our means every single year, which is a balanced budget in which our revenues exactly equal our expenses. So for example, provincial jurisdiction for hospitals and schools, if they wanted to maintain the exact same number of nurses, the exact same number of teachers, and they experience 5% inflation maintaining that level, they don't have to increase revenue to cover that cost. They can increase your personal income tax, they can increase the corporate income tax, they can increase the royalty rates on natural resource revenues such as from forestry, but they don't have to. On the municipal side, if you think about a service that we provide here in the city, such as the pool, the Nicola Valley Aquatic Center, if we have 5% inflation on our electrical costs, we have 2 choices. We can increase property tax to cover that cost, or we have to make service level reductions to offset it. Because again, our revenues and our expenses must balance every single year. Those can be very difficult decisions to make, ultimately, and the ultimate choice in that is with your elected representatives on council. This slide here goes through some of the many budget considerations that both staff and council consider throughout the financial planning process. What is our current level of service for the service we provide? Does the community and council desire an increase in level of service? Are we simply trying to maintain the level of service that we currently have? Do we desire potentially service reductions because we're trying to prioritize being able to provide service in another area, in another department? When we think about financial sustainability, we're primarily thinking about a balanced operating budget, again, in which revenues and expenses are equal, but we're also thinking about the ability to save and fund capital investments in infrastructure well into the future to enable us to continue providing services. So think about things like our wastewater treatment plant. That's a big investment that we need to save for and plan for to be able to continue providing water and sewer services for many decades to come. The city has limited resources, both from a financial standpoint and from our staff resources, our human capital, and the ability to provide services. And so it's ultimately about prioritizing how much we can accomplish in any given year, given limited funds and limited amounts of employee and human capital time. We also look at gaps in the financial plan. in terms of trying to understand what we can gain some traction on that maybe we haven't been able to gain traction on in the past. And staff and council have to be very pragmatic on this. And so we try and pick one or two things to focus on in any given year. So last year you would have seen council and staff focus very much on saving for water sewer infrastructure starting in 2024. This year we're starting to talk about saving for parks and recreational facilities and making sure that we can update those facilities and keep them running for decades to come. And then next year you're likely to see us focus very much on our transportation network, so our roads, our sidewalks, our bridges. So every year we continually try and find one area that we can gain more traction on to increase our sustainability in the future. This slide is an example of what our internal templates look like in terms of building the budget. So for every service in the city, the senior leadership team fills out this template for all 5 years in the financial plan. And we have to think about numerous factors when doing so. We think about the cost of wages, we think about inflationary factors, we think about whether council desires level of service changes, the ability to trade off level of service in one area to be able to fund level of service in another. Ultimately, we touch about 23,914 cells in Excel before council ever sees the outcome of that process in terms of the draft budget. This slide here summarizes what that council presentation looks like and how we go from 23,914 cells of data into something that's hopefully digestible for council and the community as a whole. So this slide is an example of what you would have seen in our draft budget for the sewer service, both on the operating and the capital side, in terms of what we spend money on, how it's funded, and some of those capital priorities over the next 5 years. And finally, this is a timeline overview of what the budgeting process looks like. So staff started working on the budget throughout the fall. In December, we presented the draft to council, and now here in January, we're embarking on a series of public engagement to get feedback on that budget. Ultimately, we're going to progress towards financial plan and tax rate bylaws in April and May, and that ultimately provides legal authority for me to send out tax notices to our residents and our businesses. So this concludes our budget process overview, and we welcome any questions.
So one of the reasons that we came to see all of you today is because, well, you'll see we're videotaping, and I'm sure you're told that, because we want to be able to give our residents more opportunities to think about how they can be involved in this governance process. You vote, it's not, your job doesn't have to be done, right? So the budget is the biggest thing. We cannot do anything without the budget bylaw. So if we do not have a budget bylaw passed, work has to stop, essentially, because we don't have authority as staff to continue the work. So when we're talking about this particular budget bylaw, we wanted to give you guys a sense of, the whole process that we go from start to finish. We'll finish the budget bylaw. Kevin will then start getting into the audit with our auditors. He'll finish that. He might get 2 weeks off, and then we'll go right back into budgeting. So it's a very, it's a circular process for him around this budget. This is our key document. This is the bylaw that gives staff the authority to do work. When we did our budgeting last year, Kevin and I, both of us, our first year here in Merritt, going through the budget process. And we were really looking at where were those shortfalls. So when Kevin's talking about, we're going to focus on an area of service, what we're really talking about in a lot of ways is money in the bank. So we don't have enough money in the bank, and I think I said this the last time I visited with you, we don't have enough money in the bank to do all of the things we need to do for our core services. So wastewater treatment plant is past its end of life, which means it is at the point of failure at any point. We have to plan how we're going to save money for that. So that's a $60 to $80 million piece of infrastructure. We're going to have to pay for at least half of it. We might get federal grants or provincial grants that will pay for the other half. So we need to come up with $30 to $40 million for that one piece of infrastructure. And so what we had seen was that instead of money going into the bank to save for these things, they were using some of that money to pay for our daily services. And that's not what we want, right? Because that's like, you know, you want to buy a new car, but you keep using that money that you're putting away for that new car to buy new clothes or to go on a holiday or whatever, right? You can't steal from one to the other. So what we've had to do is last year we saw a 12.5% recommended increase in taxation. And this year a similar level of increase in taxation because we have to stop using our reserve funds, so our money in the bank, to do our daily operations. Otherwise we're never going to get to that $30 or $40 million point. Because right now we're closer to 10 million. And that's, again, just one piece of infrastructure. So this is why we're here with you. We want you to really have a sense of how we have to think about all of this, not year to year, but 10 years, 20 years down the road. So any questions about that or comments?
I'm just going to say that I had my neighbor get hold of me and say, did you see anything on the water, sewage, garbage increase that was coming, 17.25%? Is that right? I'm not sure. Something somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's like $40.
Yeah, and she was just, I mean, she's relatively new to Merritt. And I went back and I looked, and we've not had a water sewage increase in 5 years. So we have not taken into account inflation, wages, cost of living, well, cost of doing business. I just wanted to say that, you know, it's time.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And that was particularly an area where we were taking money out of our savings account to fund our operational services. So not only were we not putting money into savings, we were taking it out of savings. So that's why, you know, we need to see that. Similarly, our recreation facilities, you'll notice that recreation facility prices have gone up. Some of those have not gone up for 20 years. And again, if we talk about just the change in the rate of power and the cost of cleaning supplies and, you know, salaries have to go up and renovations have to happen, repairs have to happen. It gets quite expensive. I think Councillor Charney? Okay, so Councillor Charney would like to know about some of the reserves that we're targeting, we have, and that we're looking at in the next couple of years.
Certainly. So, as mentioned, our top priority starting with last year's budgeting process was our water and sewer infrastructure. And we focused very much exclusively on getting that path and that journey started. We're talking this year about what we can do in the parks and recreation space. So we have nothing currently saved in terms of the ability to fund park renewal and the ability to keep our recreational facilities operational. So there's some really large capital investments that will be required. So we have a relatively older municipal arena, and there's brine lines and concrete floor replacements that will happen very early in the 2030s that will cost the city over $2 million. And so we need to think about the ability to keep that facility open, given that we can't afford a new one. So we need to maintain what we have and maintain it well and keep it operating. And so if we start that savings journey now and also look at other opportunities such as maybe sponsorship of the facility, the combination of those revenue sources could potentially keep the arena operating well into the 2030s. And that's really our goal, is to start thinking about all the areas that have those gaps and how we can start positioning them to maintain level of service in the future.
I was in Cranbrook over the holidays and I went swimming in their recreation facilities 3 times while I was there. I'm not sure what the going rate for seniors at our pool is now. Does anybody know?
It's I believe it's $3.50.
Okay, they were charging me $6 in Cranbrook per senior. And most people were willing to pay it. You could quite probably put that up to 5 and not lower your attendance rate. We'd be devastated without our pool, but if you compare it to the costs in other areas, Hours are way lower than they need to be, and that's a facility that I use 2 or 3 times a week.
Thank you for that perspective. I think that's an excellent point in terms of the value that we offer our residents while trying to balance the sustainability and the ability to continue providing that level of service in the future. And so you'll see us often now consider fees and charges over not just the current year, but over a 3-year period to provide some of that outlook and that perspective on the ability to keep up with inflation, ensure that we don't dig any of those financial holes, and can continue providing service in the future. I look back, I came from Calgary before I moved to Merritt, and the entrance fee at the pool where I lived was $19 for an adult. And so, you know, even with adults, you know, I think being charged about $5 here in the city, there's still excellent value, and it's an excellent facility for a community our size. And so we need to be grateful for that and maintain that facility well into the future to serve existing and future residents.
So you'll hear talk about the cost of RCMP services. And I know there was some concern because one of the things that council had spoken about very early on in our process was how are we going to manage the cost of RCMP? Currently it's 40% of our municipal budget goes to police services. And it's going to go up. In the next 5 years, we're going to see body cameras, we're going to see new vehicles, we're going to see new sidearms, we're going to see, and so there's all of this new modernization of equipment that the municipality is responsible for paying for our members here. So we have 17 members, but in most detachments, I shouldn't say most, in all detachments, and I'm an ex-member, so I feel comfortable speaking to this, in pretty much everywhere in this country, there's no RCMP detachment that is at full strength. So when we say full strength, that would be 17 members, which is our municipal contracted amount. Right now, we're at 14. We're likely not to get above 15 anytime soon. Not enough cadets are going through depot. People are retiring at a very high rate right now. People who were entered into the RCMP around the time I did are coming over their 25-year period. So they're in that 25 to 30-year period, and they're out the door, right? They're taking that pension and hitting the road. And so we're not able to replace them fast enough. So it's almost impossible to imagine we're going to have 17 members here. So we have to now sort of be creative about how we budget, because we don't want to necessarily decrease our allocation, but we want to not be planning for more than we actually have to pay for. So we have to kind of find that balance. So I just, if anybody was thinking about that or wondering about that, we're doing a lot of work to try and figure out the best strategy to deal with that, because each member's worth about $200,000.
I believe before the provincial portion is factored in, that it's $242,000 on a per basis for each member now. Our portion in the city of Merritt is 70%. We do have the province that pays a portion, but I believe before that provincial portion is factored in, the burden cost is $242,000.
So if 1% of taxation is 100, Kevin will tell you the exact number.
113,274.
He knows exactly how many cells he fills in and exactly how much a tax percentage costs. It's like my performing guy. So if you're thinking about that amount for 1% of your taxes, that means each of those members is at least 1.5% of taxation. And as their cost goes up, we continue to see more, right? We're expecting in the next 5 years, they'll be closer to 50% of our budget. And so, if we can figure out a way to not be budgeting and asking the taxpayers to pay taxes based on members we're not gonna likely see, then, we gotta figure out how that works, because that is a huge percentage, right? So there's a few different ideas. We're going to be presenting to council some updates, things on the budget on Tuesday. So you can come or you can watch it on YouTube. And then we'll be doing open house meetings with mayor and council and our senior leadership team will be there January 30th. There'll be an afternoon, I believe it's 12 to 2. Kim knows, 12 to 2, and then 6 to 8 in the evening. So that people can come and have an opportunity to look a little bit more at what we're doing with the budget. But if there's any other questions, we're happy to take them.
I got a question for you. I don't need the mic.
Okay.
Okay, what's the operating cost of our hospitals? Do we have to pay? We pay it on our taxes, so I'd like to know what the percentage is that we pay for the hospitals.
So there is a requisition for both the Thompson-Nicola Regional District and the hospital that's on your tax bills. That doesn't necessarily represent the true operating cost of a hospital. So there's capital components and there's other funding sources at the provincial level that fund the administration of that service. But we do pay the TNRD 1.4 million on the standard requisition and then another $500,000 on the hospitals.
And I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but the mayor has sent a bill.
We already know you ain't gonna get paid for it.
But it's,
At least he tried.
yeah, but it's gaining traction amongst other communities. We have a bill in for, all of our closures. Plus, we also have a bill in because I don't know if you're aware of this, but our fire service goes out and acts like an ambulance, right? And so every time our fire service goes out, our paid on-call firefighters go out to a call. It costs money. We don't get any money back from the province on that. That's an agreement that was signed in 2011 that we would do that, but there's no actual financial contribution back, which was not a big deal in 2011 because they might have gone up to 30 or 40 extra calls a year. We have, in this 2024, responded to about 1,100 calls total, which is, I think, previously, like 4 or 5 years ago, they might have responded to 300 or 400 calls in a year. So those are just the things that we think about when we're thinking about financial planning into the future, right? What does this look like for us? How do we mitigate these costs to the community? And sometimes it takes way longer than we want it to. We want to have this problem solved. Like Kevin and I are constantly going like, wish we had a solution to that, but that's going to take us 3 or 4 years, or that's going to, and that's the hardest part is we're thinking every time we talk about budget about what does that look like 10, 20, 30 years down the road for this community. And we're not always like, can't always find that quick solution, but we're always thinking about these things like hospital closures and the cost of our fire service because of ambulance calls, and our contributions to the TNRD, our contributions to different types of funds that we're required to participate in. And so we really have to find a way to make sure that we're consciously thinking about that.
So Cynthia, when the fire department goes out with the ambulance, does that call as ambulance calls, or is that counted as fire service calls?
So often what happens is they might go together, but often because we don't have enough ambulances in the community, we don't have paramedic services in the community, our fire department can respond quicker.
Right. So
Yeah.
when they get emergency medical, even if it's not the paramedic.
Yeah.
Call.
Yeah. So some of our work experience firefighters
Yeah.
are actually as well paramedics.
I love having 6 lovely firefighters in my house to help get my 300-pound husband up on it.
Cynthia, they can't transport.
No, that's true. They cannot transport, although they're very helpful to the ambulance when they're trying to get them out to transport. So,
Yes.
but yeah. So, any other questions about how we budget and what we think about, and any concerns? But we look forward to hopefully some of you coming to all of you coming to the open house. We'll have lots of educational items, but also some things to think about for this year's financial plan. Any other questions? And Kevin and I, the mayor, can hang around for a few minutes and answer any one-on-ones. So, okay. Thank you very much for your time.